A dull thud. It was so faint I almost believed I'd imagined it. Sometimes, in the dark, our minds make sounds out of nothing, out of fear or longing, out of some shape we wish to hear. But this was real. A quiet vibration of wood, like a distant knock on a locked door. I was standing in our front hallway when I heard it, and it took me back to a moment I swore I'd forgotten. I used to think I'd have a son. Don't ask me why. Maybe it was part of that ideal blueprint of life. Find a woman you love, build a stable home, have a child who becomes a better version of you. For years, Jennifer and I talked about it. Someday, we'd say. Someday, when the finances lined up. Someday, when we traveled enough. Someday, when we were ready. Then the years passed. The illusions settled into the dust of everyday routine, and neither of us brought it up again. But in the back of my mind, I always pictured him. A kid, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a baseball cap a size too large, trying to pitch a curveball the way I once tried to impress my own father. That was a memory we never made. So the dull thud in the hallway, the hush of something I couldn't name, briefly carried me to that place of regret, to the hush of a front door never slammed by a teenage boy returning from practice. I stood there, blinking at the emptiness. My name is Lance Carter, and I should tell you, trust can be the deadliest weapon of all. We wield it innocently in marriage, forging an unspoken pact to keep each other safe. It seems harmless, an act of love, not of war. Yet once that trust is betrayed, it can slice you open so deeply you can't even cry out. There's just silence. I wish I could claim that all of this, my story, started with that faint knock in the hallway, but that'd be a lie. It actually began weeks before, maybe months, the moment I found a tie on our coat rack that wasn't mine. It was a fancy silk tie, with the faintest stripe running diagonally across, and it smelled of cologne that wasn't my brand. You pick up these tiny details after years of routine. My tie rack is by the closet in the master bedroom. I never leave them at the door. I noticed it on my way in one late afternoon, an unremarkable Thursday. My wife was in the kitchen, half turned toward me, her blouse sleeves rolled up as she rinsed lettuce. I remember the angle of her back, straight, a bit tense. She didn't say anything about the tie. She greeted me, but in that instant, my vision tunneled on that piece of fabric. I thought, that's not mine, and my blood went cold. I'm not the type to shout accusations. I didn't flip the table and demand the truth. Maybe it's cowardice, maybe it's something else, but I let it be. I said nothing. Instead, I tucked the tie in my hand and hung it properly in our bedroom closet, right next to my own. My wife, Jennifer, looked over her shoulder as if checking whether I'd noticed, but I just gave her a polite smile, the same one I might offer the bank teller, and said, "Smells good in here. What's for dinner?" She answered softly, like she was relieved I hadn't pressed the issue, and carried on preparing our meal. For the next several days, I watched, not with eyes full of anger, but with a hushed vigilance that gnawed at my nerves. Jennifer would come home later than usual, text more than she used to. She'd linger in her home office, door half shut, talking on her phone in a voice too low for me to hear. There was this tension in her posture when we made small talk at breakfast, like she was waiting for me to bring it up, to start a fight. But I didn't. My father always said, "Son, once you accuse, you can't unaccuse." I guess that shaped me into a quiet observer, slow to speak even if I'm screaming inside. We had no children, so there weren't family dinners with a teen or younger kid around, no soccer practices or school nights. It was just the two of us in a house that felt bigger than it should. Once upon a time, we planned to fill those empty rooms with a child's laughter. Yet each year, we found reasons to postpone. I suspect, in some corner of her soul, Jennifer resented that we never took the leap. And me. Maybe I resented it too. I wish I could say I caught them in bed right away, that I rushed in brandishing righteous fury. But no, that's not how it went. The tie was my first clue. The second was the cologne I smelled on her, faint and foreign. When she slipped into bed one night, I touched her wrist gently. She stiffened for a fraction of a second, then forced a small laugh, saying a coworker had hugged her goodbye at a business event. My hand lingered on her bare arm, searching for any sign of honesty. Her pulse throbbed beneath my fingertips. I said nothing. Again, that silence. Trust as a weapon. Or maybe it was fear as a shield. Time passed in a haze, each day heavier than the last. Meanwhile, my nights were plagued by the memory of that tie, the perfect symbol of an intruder in my marriage. Jennifer started wearing more perfume, as if to mask the traces of cologne that might cling to her hair or clothes. She thought I couldn't smell the difference, but oh, I did. Everything about her was different, her eyes darting away from mine. The half-lies in her voice when she said she had a meeting or a late dinner with a client. I recognized her subtle stammer, how it emerged whenever she tried to shape the truth into a neat package. Part of me wanted to grab her shoulders, look her in the eyes, and say, "Who is he? Why are you doing this?" But that question, that confrontation, once you open that door, life is never the same. I never spoke. Instead, I did what my instincts told me. I counted what was mine. Literally. Documents, bank accounts, property deeds, every piece of me that I'd poured into this marriage. My father's watch that I kept in my bedside drawer, my investment in a real estate company, my own small agency that I'd built from scratch, my share of the house. I counted everything, quietly, while Jennifer was out one evening. Then I took steps to protect it. A trust for the house, a quiet sale of my portion of the business to my brother, for $1. He and I had an agreement that if I needed it back, or if I needed to shift the finances around, we'd do so. Meanwhile, I moved my personal savings to new accounts she couldn't touch. To an observer, it might seem harsh or paranoid. But something in my gut told me I'd need this shield soon. All the while, I didn't break the routine. I still kissed her on the cheek good morning, still asked how her day was, still maintained that superficial calm. If you ask me now how I managed that, I can't fully explain. Maybe I was on autopilot, clinging to the last bit of sanity. Maybe I hoped she'd come to her senses, break down in tears, confess everything, and beg for forgiveness. Sometimes people want to be caught. But that didn't happen. And I changed. My brand of loyalty mutated into something else. I wasn't raging. I was quietly dying inside. Or maybe evolving into someone cold, numb, and calculating. A couple of days later, I found myself doing small acts of sabotage. Nothing overt, nothing that would cause a real fight, but enough to rattle her comfort. Jennifer worked from home often, in her little office at the far end of the hallway. She always liked to keep that space cozy and warm because she tends to get chilly. So I turned off the heating valve to her radiator. In the middle of winter, that room became ice cold, and she couldn't figure out why. I'd glance at her, see her wearing layers, shivering in the morning. Did I feel guilty? Yes. Did I also feel a perverse sense of triumph? Also yes. It was my quiet war. Trust can be a weapon, but so can petty acts of revenge. I started replacing her favorite wine with cheap table wine, emptying the expensive bottles into the sink, and refilling them with an off-brand she hated. She never confronted me about the taste change, but I saw her wrinkling her nose when she took that first sip at dinner. Maybe she suspected something was off, but how do you accuse your husband of deliberately swapping your wines? That requires you to admit you sense hostility, and that would lead to bigger questions she didn't want to ask. One day, the handle on the kitchen cabinet broke. Normally, I would have fixed it right away. I'm decent with my hands, but I left it dangling. She asked me about it once or twice, but I shrugged. "I'll get to it," I said. And that was it, a small symbol of my refusal to keep up the facade. She must have noticed the shift in my attitude, this quiet coldness. Maybe she thought I was depressed, bored, or going through a midlife crisis. Let her think that. I wasn't about to clarify. Then came the night I heard them. Jennifer thought I was at a networking event for the evening, something I'd do once or twice a month for my real estate contacts. But I'd wrapped it up early. I was on my way home, mind adrift, when I decided to stop by a pharmacy. My brother had told me about a new treatment for back pain, and I wanted to pick up a patch or some gel. By the time I arrived on our street, it was already past 9. The house was dark aside from a faint glow in the living room. I walked to the door, turned the key, and stepped inside. That's when I heard muffled voices. A male voice murmuring something low, urgent. A female voice. Hers, hushed, breath-catching. My stomach knotted. You know that feeling when your heart is pounding so loudly you think it might snap your ribs. That was me. I was trembling with adrenaline, but I forced myself to move slowly. Step by step, I made my way down the hallway. Jennifer's voice was clearer now, a soft moan that made my blood freeze. I caught a glimpse of them through the slightly ajar door to our living room, her pinned against the wall, arms around the waist of a man whose face I couldn't fully see. The angle was weird, partial, but enough. I recognized the shape of the tie on the coffee table. The same diagonal stripe. His jacket had slid halfway down, and their bodies were pressed so intimately I felt nauseated. I could have burst in, could have shattered that moment with a shout. Instead, I stood there like an intruder in my own home, watching the scene unfold in horrifying clarity. He kissed her neck, and I saw the way her hair fell back, the way her eyes fluttered shut as she sighed his name. Michael. That's how I learned his identity. My face was hot. My fists clenched so tight, I felt the nails digging into my palms. They didn't notice me. They were too lost in each other. An erotic subtext. Yes, it was more than subtext. It was all there in front of me. The unbuttoned blouse, the slide of her hand across his chest, the warmth of their breath tangling. My wife, a woman who once told me I was her only love, was now giving herself to another man, right in the space where we used to watch movies together. I felt my throat tighten. My voice threatened to erupt, but I held it in. Some twisted part of me wanted them to see me, to watch them recoil in shame. Another part wanted to slip away, run somewhere I'd never have to confront this humiliation. And a deeper part of me, the part that was raised by a father who believed a man doesn't wail or sob, well, that part just locked me into a rigid silence. I backed away. My pulse hammered. Maybe one of my steps made a noise because I heard them break apart. I froze in the hallway, out of sight. Jennifer's voice was breathless. Did you hear something? She was still panting, still adjusting her clothes. The man, Michael, murmured something reassuring, presumably telling her it was nothing, and then he coaxed her back into that embrace. I could see his hand slide along her waist. I swallowed, tears burning at the edges of my eyes. But I refused to cry. Not then. Not ever, if I could help it. I turned and walked back to the front door, slid outside, and gently closed it. My ears rang in the cold night air. A neighbor's porch light flickered across the street. For a while, I just stood there, trying to remember how to breathe. Eventually, I got into my car, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the dark houses. This was real. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She was sleeping with another man, and I'd witnessed it. You'd think rage would come next, but all I felt was emptiness, a quiet so deep it was almost deafening. A man's trust, my trust, turned against me, like a blade in the gut. Let me be clear, I'm not proud of how I handled it. But after all the talk about a man stands tall, a man doesn't cry, it was the only way I knew. So I drove around aimlessly for hours, returning home only after midnight. By then, the lights were off. I didn't see any sign of Michael's presence. Jennifer was in bed, presumably alone. In the dim light from the hallway, I saw that her face looked peaceful, as though she'd had a satisfying evening. The thought twisted my stomach, but I said nothing. I slipped under the covers, turned away, and waited for morning. That was the night. A new distance formed between us. The next day, I forced a smile while making coffee. Jennifer asked, "Are you okay? You seem quiet." "Didn't sleep well," I said, stifling a yawn. My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. She offered a sympathetic nod, started to speak, then let the silence hang. She didn't press me further, and I didn't volunteer anything. If she wondered whether I knew, she didn't show it. Or maybe she was too afraid to ask. In the days that followed, I took the final steps to protect myself, formally signing documents that transferred ownership of our house into a newly created trust I controlled, finalizing the sale of my business share to my brother. He signed the papers without question, though he looked me in the eye and asked if I was in trouble. All I said was, "Not yet." I smiled at Jennifer at dinner. We ate in near silence, and she stared at me with a mix of confusion and wariness. Part of me wanted to fling my fork aside and shout, "I saw you and Michael. I know you're sleeping with him." But I didn't. Instead, I asked how her day was, listened to her talk about a marketing campaign at the cosmetic company she worked for. She talked about new product launches, about coworker gossip. She waited for me to respond, but I just stared at her, occasionally nodding. Eventually, she laughed uncomfortably, saying, "Lance, you're scaring me. Why aren't you saying anything?" I put down my fork and cleared my throat. I felt my voice catch, but I pushed through. "Just tired." I managed. "Work's been hectic." It came out steadier than I expected. She eyed me carefully, but let it go. She always was the more talkative one in our marriage, especially when she felt anxious. I used to find her chatter comforting. Now it just grated on me like nails on a chalkboard. Meanwhile, little cracks continued to form in our home life. The heater in her office remained broken. My doing. The house felt colder in general, or maybe that was just my perception. The nights were long, each hour weighed down by the knowledge that she was probably texting him. When she slipped off to bed early, I'd remain in the living room, staring at the silent TV, letting the blue light wash over me. Sometimes, in the reflection on the dark screen, I'd see my own face, tired, aging faster than it should. One afternoon, while Jennifer was out at a client dinner, I found her phone charging on the kitchen counter. She'd forgotten it. The screen lit up with a text. * Michael. Miss your voice. Let's talk soon. * My jaw clenched. I stared at those words. Then I pressed the power button and put the phone aside. If I started reading more, I'd feed the rage inside me. A rage that was building but had no outlet, because outwardly I was calm. Inwardly, I was slipping away. At this point, you might wonder, why didn't I just confront her, or throw her out, or fight for my marriage? Maybe I was in denial. Maybe I still loved her, in some twisted sense. But mostly, I was numb. In the quiet spaces of my mind, I repeated, * trust is a weapon. She has used it against me. Now I will use it against her. But I had no plan. I was just lashing out in small ways, withdrawing everything that once made me a caring husband. The final blow came 2 weeks later. She said, "I'm leaving." Just like that, over breakfast, as if she were announcing she was stepping out to buy groceries. She spoke the words while holding her coffee mug, gaze sliding across the table rather than meeting my eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Lance." I set my spoon down. For a heartbeat, I felt a surge of panic. Then I realized I'd been expecting this. Hell, maybe I'd wanted it. I nodded slowly. "Okay." Jennifer blinked. "That's all you have to say?" I shrugged. "I won't fight you. If you want to go, go." She sat there, mouth opening and closing like she had 100 arguments prepared, probably expecting me to beg or curse. But I had no tears left to shed. I was beyond that. The dull ache in my chest was all that remained. A man doesn't cry, son. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Instead of tears, a bitter dryness coated my throat. My voice wavered anyway when I spoke. "Look, I get it. We've drifted apart. My gaze flicked to her ring finger, still wearing the band I'd placed there so many years ago. I didn't mention Michael. Didn't say a word about the tie, the cologne, the nights I'd spent awake. Just watched her face, saw the guilt flicker in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, staring at the coffee mug. I don't know what to say. I studied her for a long moment, remembering all the times we laughed, the times we made plans, plans for a family, for a future, plans that now felt like illusions. "No need," I replied. "Some things can't be fixed with words." She nodded, swallowing hard, then got up from the table. I'll pack some things." I didn't offer to help. I watched her ascend the staircase, every step echoing. That sound, footsteps growing distant, hit me like a punch to the gut. This was the woman I once adored, the person I believed I'd spend my life with. And now she was quietly leaving. I let out a breath that felt like it had been caged in my chest for days. A part of me wanted to scream at her retreating back. I know about him. I saw you. I smell him on you. How dare you do this to me? But I stayed silent. Because the truth wouldn't save us. It wouldn't change the outcome. Let her go, I told myself. Let her do what she thinks she needs to do. She returned downstairs with a small suitcase. I'm not sure why the rest of her things didn't matter at that moment, but she only took a handful of essentials. We stood near the door, and I forced myself to ask, "Where will you stay?" "Just with a friend," she said. Probably a lie. Maybe with Michael. I didn't press it. I opened the door for her. She lingered there, as though expecting me to break down or at least give her a parting shot. My face stayed neutral. My insides twisted, but my face was cold. Finally, she murmured, "I'm sorry, Lance," and stepped outside. She paused one last time, looking over her shoulder as if searching for something in my expression. Anger, heartbreak, regret. Maybe she found only emptiness, because she turned away and left. I locked the door. The click of the deadbolt resonated. Then I pressed my forehead against the wood and let out a shaky breath. I was free. So why did I feel like I'd been gutted? The day after she left, I continued my routine. I forced myself to run errands, settle some overdue paperwork. I noticed the house felt bigger, emptier, but also less tense. I stood in her office at one point, thinking I might fix the heater now that she was gone. But I decided against it. Let it stay cold as a reminder of what rotted between us. I looked at the old wedding photo on her bookshelf, a smiling, younger, hopeful. My gaze lingered on her face in that picture. Then I placed it face down. I spent the next few nights alone in that quiet house. My brother called, asking if I was all right. I gave him some vague explanation that Jennifer had left, that I'd sold him my share of the business for good reason. He offered to reverse the sale, but I told him to wait. I wasn't sure if she'd try to claim anything or push for a divorce settlement, but I was prepared. At odd moments, I remembered that son I always imagined having. Part of me felt ridiculous, mourning a future that never existed. But that small dream nagged at me. Had we tried earlier? Had we built that family? Would that have saved our marriage? Probably not. A child might have been just another victim in the crossfire. Maybe it was better this way. The real confrontation happened a week later. Jennifer texted me, asking if we could meet. "Sure," I replied. When she arrived, I saw that she looked thinner, her face drawn. She stood on the porch, glancing at me with hesitant eyes. I invited her in, and we sat in the living room, the same place I'd seen her locked in Michael's arms. I wondered if the memory weighed on her too. She cleared her throat. "We need to talk about the house. And the finances." I nodded. "Go ahead." She fiddled with her hair, a nervous habit. "My lawyer says, since we're legally married, I have a right to half the property. We can either sell it or buy me out. But I can't pay the mortgage on my own. So I interrupted, my voice surprisingly calm. The house is in a trust. My trust. She froze. What do you mean? I explained, as gently as I could, that I'd transferred the deed weeks before. Her face paled. When? She breathed. After you gave me reason to do so, I said evenly. I met her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to demand an explanation, but a flicker of understanding passed over her face. She must have realized that I knew. Knew about him. Knew about everything. Her expression crumpled, and her voice shook. I didn't realize. She let out a ragged exhale. You can't just cut me off. I pressed my lips together. Legally, I can, Jennifer. My finances are separate. My business is no longer mine on paper. You want the couch, the dishes. Take them. But you're not getting half my life's work. I won't stand for that. She blinked back tears. I never wanted it like this. I sighed, shaking my head. My voice caught, but I kept going, ignoring the rawness in my throat. I didn't want it this way either, but you made your choices. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. Stop, I said softly. I'm not here to listen to excuses. You left. You're with him. Fine, I won't fight that. But you're not taking my home. She swallowed, eyes glossy. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really am. I couldn't handle how distant we were. Her voice died. She stared at her hands. Distant. The word echoed in my mind. She found comfort in Michael's arms because I was too busy or too closed off. That might be true, or might be her rationalization. Doesn't matter. The damage was done. The memory of that tie, her moan, their entwined shadows in my living room. I couldn't erase it. Jennifer, I said, quieter now, you can have your freedom. All I ask is that we finalize everything quickly. No dragging it out. No drama. We both deserve to move on. She nodded slowly. Her tears clung to her lashes, but she didn't let them fall. I understand, she said, voice trembling. Then she stood up. I'll gather the rest of my things tomorrow. She paused, forcing a weak smile. You have a good lawyer, obviously. A hint of bitterness laced her tone. Yeah, I replied. I do. She turned and walked toward the door. I followed her silently. Just before she stepped outside, she glanced back. I thought for a moment she might confess, might tell me everything. But she just said, take care of yourself. I nodded. You too. And then she was gone, leaving me in the same hush as before, a hush that felt final, like the closing of a chapter. I felt the tension in my shoulders loosen. The quiet was still oppressive, still stung, but at least I wasn't living in that limbo of suspicion. I'd seen the truth, accepted it, and protected what was mine. Maybe that was the best ending I could hope for. I'd love to say I felt victorious. That's not exactly true. There was a hollowness in me, an echo of what used to be joy, replaced by a numb acceptance. Over the next few days, I packed some of her clothes in boxes, left them in the foyer. She came by while I was at work, picked them up, and left a short note saying, I'll send you the forms. No signature, just a cursive swirl. Her wedding ring was on top of the note. I stared at it for a long time, that small gold band that once symbolized everything. Then I placed it in a drawer. The divorce process moved quickly. I guess we both wanted to avoid drawn-out pain. My lawyer handled the details. Jennifer's lawyer tried to pry at my finances, but found everything locked behind the trust or assigned to my brother's name. In the end, we settled for a token sum, some personal property, and a swift dissolution of the marriage. No children to complicate it, just a clean break. I had times, late at night, when I'd stand in the empty living room, remembering that stolen moment, her and Michael pressed together. My fists would clench, nails biting into my palms. I'd feel my throat tighten, like I might sob. But I never let myself. My father's voice echoed. Asterisk, a man doesn't cry. Asterisk, so I'd swallow that knot of pain, let the tears burn behind my eyes, and remained silent. It was during one of those nights, maybe a month after Jennifer left, that I heard another dull thud in the house. I'd been drifting in and out of a half-sleep on the couch. My heart lurched, imagining for a second that they were here again, that I'd find them in some ghostly replay. But it was just the old pipes, or maybe something shifting in the attic. The house was old, and it groaned sometimes. I exhaled, closed my eyes again. My mind wandered to that imaginary son, the one I'd never have. Maybe it was better, I reminded myself. No child to watch the disintegration of trust between his parents. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, a sense of calm settled over me. I focused on my work again, reconnected with old friends. My brother and I had a frank discussion, and we arranged for me to buy my share of the business back under new terms, favorable to me, but secure. He teased me a bit, said I pulled the greatest chess move in a marriage meltdown. I didn't smile. It hadn't felt like a game. Sometimes people ask about Jennifer. They'd wonder where she went, or why we split. I never go into details. A quiet, "we grew apart," is enough to satisfy casual curiosity. A few close friends suspect the truth, but they respect my silence. That's the thing about trust. It's personal, intimate. When it's shattered, you don't go around showing the shards to everyone. On a rainy evening not long ago, I drove past a restaurant downtown and saw Michael's car parked out front, recognizable from the vanity plate. I slowed, feeling my stomach tighten. Through the big glass windows, I spotted him with Jennifer at a table, leaning toward each other, talking intently. He seemed animated, waving his hands, leaning in for a quick kiss. She smiled in that way I remembered, bright and genuine, the way she used to smile at me. For a moment, I almost wanted to feel hatred or a fresh wave of jealousy. But what I felt was nothing, a dull emptiness. So I kept driving, swallowed the lump in my throat, and told myself that some scabs shouldn't be picked open. The divorce finalized soon after. We signed papers in a sterile office, said polite farewells, and left. No big drama, just a business transaction. That's what my marriage had become in the end. A set of documents to be dissolved, each of us walking away with whatever we could salvage. I walked away with a house, my finances intact, and a heart that felt like a battered shell. Sometimes, when I'm alone in bed, I recall the hush of that night, the surreal sight of them tangled together. Her lips parted, his hand on her body. The betrayal so raw that I didn't even let myself shout. Perhaps I should have. Perhaps letting it out would have saved me from months of pent-up anger. But that's not how I was raised. I was taught that men handle their burdens quietly, stoically. So that's what I did. I handled it. It's been a few months now. The final scene in that silent war. My father's watch still sits in my bedside drawer, reminding me that trust can be a family heirloom or a curse, depending on how you wield it. I check on my parents occasionally. My dad's doing better after his heart scare, but he senses something has changed in me. He sees it in my eyes, maybe. I told him I got divorced, and he tried to console me, awkwardly patting my shoulder. He's not a man of big emotions, either. Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I've thrown myself into work. I'm making a steady living, flipping properties, dealing with clients. The house is still quiet, but not unbearably so. I keep the living room lights low, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear that dull thud again, a phantom echo in the walls. Maybe it's the old pipes, or maybe it's just a reminder that once upon a time, I believed I'd hear a child's laughter in these halls. Instead, I heard the hush of infidelity. I go to the front hallway sometimes and imagine the life that might have been. Jennifer pregnant, me assembling a crib, trying to figure out how to be a father. I wonder if that alternate timeline would have changed anything. Did we even love each other enough to survive that? Or was the love we had always too fragile, too conditional? Maybe we were both naive, building illusions. If so, I suppose illusions always shatter in the end. A man doesn't cry. That's the code I've lived by. But do I ever feel that ache behind my eyes, that pressure in my chest? Yes, I do. Every day in small ways. It's the price you pay for letting trust become a weapon used against you. I imagine some men find a new love, or fling themselves into single life, searching for a spark. I don't know if that's for me. For now, I'm content to exist in this space, to breathe in the emptiness, to accept the echoes of what once was. Maybe I'll rebuild. Maybe I'll let go entirely. Time will tell. What I do know is that I'm not the man I was before. Something in me has hardened, or maybe just matured. They say heartbreak can be a teacher. If so, it taught me how quietly one can lose everything, and how quietly one can endure. When I think of Jennifer these days, I don't feel that fierce urge for revenge, or the burn of betrayal. I just feel a muted sorrow, like seeing the ruins of a once beautiful building. You can't rebuild those stones. All you can do is walk away and try not to dwell on the collapse. Before the divorce was finalized, I remember packing the last box of her stuff. Sweaters, photo frames, the silly trinkets she used to collect. I came across a small jewelry box with a note tucked inside. Asterisk to my loving wife. Here's to our bright future. Asterisk. I had written that note one anniversary years ago. Reading it now, I felt a strange twist in my chest, like I was visiting the grave of an old friend. I put the note back, sealed the box, and left it in the foyer for her. Part of me hoped she would read it and remember the good times, wonder where it all went wrong. But maybe she never even opened it. Still, I've kept some small souvenirs. A single photo, the one where we're standing by a lake in the early days of our relationship, both of us grinning ear to ear. I'm holding it now as I finish telling you this story. I'm not sure why I keep it. Maybe to remind myself I once knew how to be happy. Maybe to remind myself that illusions are powerful. Or maybe because a tiny, stubborn piece of me still wants to believe in love, though it's a battered concept now. Do I regret not confronting her that night, not charging into the living room and ripping Michael off her? Sometimes, perhaps it would have let me vent my fury. But I also know that fury can lead to acts you can't take back. The things you say in anger, the violence you might unleash, those can haunt you. So I let my vengeance be subtle and precise, in those legal documents and trivial sabotages. Call it cowardice or call it self-control. Either way, it's done. Trust is an odd thing. We think of it as a shield, but it can be a blade. And once it's drawn blood, there's no going back. I gave Jennifer my trust, wholeheartedly, blindly. She turned it against me. Now it's over. And I'm left with a quiet that sometimes suffocates, sometimes liberates. There are moments I catch myself breathing deep, letting that silence fill my lungs, and I feel a strange relief. Like I've been set free from a trap I didn't realize I was in. So that's my story. It ends here, in an empty house, with a man who won't cry but who carries an ache that's older than his years. I'll be all right. I've got my work, my father's watch, a sense of self-preservation, and the knowledge that you can survive a broken heart without making a spectacle of it. Life goes on. The memory of that dull thud in the hallway will fade over time, replaced by whatever quiet steps the future brings. And maybe one day, the ghosts of what could have been will fall silent too. I'm not there yet, but at least I'm free. And in the aftermath of betrayal, maybe that's the best victory any man can ask for.